All right, welcome back to the channel, guys. I'm here with my good friend, A True Hero, and we wanted to do this video. This is something that came up during Nationals while we were still playing in Swiss. Cairo and I were standing next to each other, and I had mentioned to him, I was like, I really have to respect you as a player because you've gotten really, really good, and I'm not even sure how or why, but I've known Cairo for over 10 years. And it's not that I didn't think that he was good or anything, but we don't really have many interactions prior to the pandemic of playing Yu-Gi-Oh in the same circle that much. Like he played at my locals when we were younger, but even then we rarely played each other. And then as far as going into YCSs and stuff like that, I was a huge competitive player and sponsored and all that stuff. So I was all around the world, and he had moved to Korea during that time. So we didn't really see each other anymore. And I never knew how good his innate ability was to play the game. And then of course, over the course of the last couple years, just seeing so much Yu-Gi-Oh be played on Dueling Book, him and Stango, because Stango started playing during the pandemic, literally like 2020, I think was his first time playing Yu-Gi-Oh really. They've been playing a lot and just doing their own little funny cream circuit thing and going back and forth and all this other stuff. But it's been really interesting to see your growth as a player. And you said to me while we were standing next to each other at Nationals this year, the reason why, or one of the reasons why you've gotten a lot better, or what the turning point was for you when Dueling Book became a thing. And I was like, oh,
Yes.
wow, that's really interesting, because I was saying to myself, I wonder why I didn't see you performing extremely well way back in the day when we used to play in, paper Yu-Gi-Oh all the time. And I was like, one of the reasons was obviously because of resources, because, whenever someone wants to play Yu-Gi-Oh seriously, the big part of it is you need money to buy these decks. And even right now in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, cards are just very, very expensive. And so that's one thing. You need money for your deck. And especially if your deck is going to be like the best deck, sometimes those decks can cost a lot of money. Me and you go back to Teledat format, where Dark Arm Dragons were like $250, Crush Card Virus $250, whatever they were hundreds of dollars. Like a Teledat deck cost you literally over $1,000. And so there's one thing you need to afford your deck, but then you also, in order to go to an event like SJC Costa Mesa, right? Like that's an actual championship that happened in California in 2008, I think. And that one would have required you to fly all the way from where we live in Philadelphia on the East Coast to the West Coast. Very expensive flight. Also, we were young, like we were teenagers. And then you have to also have hotel and rooming and all that stuff. So it's a lot that goes into being a competitive Yu-Gi-Oh player, at least back in the day when we didn't have the option of playing like online tournaments and stuff like that. So when you said to me at Nationals this year that when Dueling Book became a thing, that was a really big part of how you got better. Do you want to elaborate on what exactly happened?
Well, I want to say this first. In order to be a proficient Yu-Gi-Oh player, I think there's three main factors that you have to consider. And the first one are the cards. And you've already explained in great detail, but you can be a great player, but if you don't have the right cards, it's going to be very difficult to top. Because, for example, Tengu format, I just recently uploaded a video on my channel about how to top of Tengu format. And in Tengu format, if you didn't have Tour Guide of the Underworld, which were at least $100, right? And I think a deal for three was 450, if I'm
Yeah,
correct.
yeah.
Right.
Honestly, yeah, it was around $400+ just to get three of them, and that was a deal.
Right. So one, the first factor you need to consider is having the right cards. Like, yes, skill is definitely a factor, but you need to have the cards. Two, going to the skill, you need the skill or the experience, right? So experience can come from even just your innate ability to play the game, or rather through playing multiple times. Like everyone has a different way that they learn, right? Some
Mhm.
people, they're just like a natural, they can just pick it up and they can just do it. And some people, they take more time, right? There's like an old saying where it's just like, we all kind of blossom at like different rates or something like that, right?
Yeah.
I'm not explaining it as elegantly as the saying goes, but the point is that you need to have the correct experience. And the last thing that you need to have in order to be a great Yu-Gi-Oh player is the resource or factor to travel, right? Because you can have all the cards, you can have all the experience that you want, you can be a great player, but if you can't travel to the events, you're just going to be a local hero. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's very true. I like all three of those points, and that kind of brings us to the topic of this video. So the main thing that I wanted to talk about when you said that to me at Nationals, it gave me the idea for this whole thing was hard work versus talent, because I would consider myself to be someone who's very talented, especially when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh in general. Like since I was younger, a lot of my peers would consider me to be the best player in our small pond, right? Like big fish, small pond. I was always the big fish in a small pond. In my local area, everyone revered me and thought that I was a really, really good player. And at the time, I didn't really think too much of it. But then as I got older and I realized that the world was a really big place, I discovered things like metagame.com and saw players like Adam Korn and Iman and Shane Scurry and Paul Leviton and like Anthony Alvarado. Who else? Like pretty much everyone who was a pro player back in the day, I idolized all of them. And I wanted to be in that same sphere of like, how do I get so good that people recognize me on a grand scale like this? And so I was like one of the local really good players. I topped a shit ton of regionals when I was younger, but I never really did anything at SJCs back in the day, showing jump championships. And then when they converted to YCS, it's kind of the same thing. I had a harder time at those events, and I didn't get to go to many of them because I was younger and I didn't have the resources to really travel too far. So if it wasn't a local event, a local YCS or whatever, I wasn't really going to go to it. But I think I've always been a pretty decent player, and I don't really know. I really don't know what made that happen. Like I think one of the things, and I say this to people all the time, I do think that there's something to be said about people who are naturally intelligent in Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Because if you're smart in general, I think about Beast Mode often when it comes to this, because Beast Mode I think is one of the smartest Yu-Gi-Oh players out there. He likes to downplay himself very often, but he is a intelligent person just in general. Like in real life, he's a nurse practitioner, which requires a lot of schooling to get to that level, right? Like that is the highest level of a nurse that you can be. He's a very, very smart guy. And when you listen to him speak, at least when I listen to him speak, I can tell that he's a smart guy. So when he plays Yu-Gi-Oh, I think that intelligence carries over into his actual gameplay. Like the way he thinks in real life and just in general, I think translates into his skill level in Yu-Gi-Oh, because it is a game where you're thinking a lot. So I would say that I'm one of the people who, because I've always been forced to be an academic by my parents when I was younger, like they just instilled in me, you need to get straight A's, you need to do really well in school. I went to private school my whole life. Those things have made me naturally very neurotic and just, I'm always in my head. I'm always thinking about every little thing. So when I play Yu-Gi-Oh, those skills developed into me being a better Yu-Gi-Oh player, I think. Now, this is not to say that people who aren't good at Yu-Gi-Oh are not intelligent people. I just think that if you are intelligent already, right? Like if you're just a naturally smart person, it helps in Yu-Gi-Oh when you play it. And this is also seen through other players too, like Sam Padigo back in the day. He's one of the smartest people I've ever met. And I think he ended up becoming a YCS champion at a point, but also he went to Worlds 1 year and was just like, had a ton of tops. He was really, really smart. He worked up spreadsheets on certain combos and stuff like that with like the Insector deck back in the day. And so his intelligence, he translated that stuff into Yu-Gi-Oh! Like he took his actual, like, I'm a smart person and moved that into Yu-Gi-Oh! And then on the other side of that, you have people who work really, really hard and they end up reaching a really, really high level as well from just putting in so much work. And that's something that I've seen happen multiple times throughout Yu-Gi-Oh, where you have these people who play the game so much, and it ends up making them a real threat in the Yu-Gi-Oh world. And I think that is so interesting because I've seen it both ways. I've seen the people who are just like, they play and they kind of pick up things really fast, like obnoxiously fast. So you're like, God damn, like it didn't take you long to realize what's going on here at all. Whereas some people might take a little longer. And there's people who play so much that they just have this wealth of experience in their head that they're able to apply to the game. So the overall
and I
point,
think
go ahead.
Going back to what I was mentioning earlier, that ties into exactly what you just said. When I think about the 3 points, right? Cards, travel, experience. In your personal case, you had the cards. Right. You had the experience because you're naturally smart, right?
Yep.
But what you didn't have, and just as you mentioned, was the opportunity to travel, which is why you were a local hero. I remember at one point, I think you went 10-0 at a Philly regional with Gladiator Beasts.
Yeah, I went 10-0 at Philly regionals like at least 8 times. Like not even kidding. I've gone undefeated at more regionals than I can count on 2 hands, because back in the day, like it just felt like swinging a sword in a kindergarten. It was very, very easy for me to beat people when I was really young and just playing like Glad format, Teledath format, even up to 2010, I think I was still doing that, because I remember maybe X-Sabers or Agents or one of those decks too, but I was able to go undefeated with like those decks as well. So yeah, that was a thing and that's why people consider me to be a local like legend essentially, because I was just able to do well at regionals. But then they were like, oh, do you go to SJCs or you go to YCSs? And I'm like, not really. Like I don't really get to go to those as often because they're not they're not close. Like oftentimes they be on the West Coast or just somewhere else that wasn't like if
Right.
something is in Chicago. I'd never been to Chicago until like Nationals 2013. I'm pretty sure, right? So
Right. Whereas in my experience, it's quite interesting because I actually had the opportunity to travel. I was able to attend any event that I wanted to because my mom, she actually works for American Airlines, which is why many of the people who follow me know I actually live in South Korea and I flew at nationals. The reason why I'm able to like fly to different places around the world and within the US is because I don't pay a full fee when I'm flying on an airplane. So I always had this opportunity to travel. And back when Frazier did start to travel, I would see him at these events. I was there also at YCS Atlanta when Frazier won. And I was there at plenty of other events that Frazier went to when he was finally got the capability to travel. But my issue was even though I had the opportunity to travel, one, I didn't have the cards. And two, I consider myself also to be quite intelligent as well. But I think where my kind of grace in Yu-Gi-Oh came through was through playing often. So I just wasn't experienced enough with the game. And then you mentioned like when Dueling Book came out, that is when it finally clicked because I
yes,
would play Dueling Book so often. Every time I would have a moment of free time, even throughout college. If I have a break between class, my friends, they're like playing in the game room. I'm at the computer lab playing Dueling Book. And I would just do Dueling Book nonstop until I understood the format so well. I was like, you have this card set, you have this card in your hand. Like I could just make accurate reads because I knew everything. But then the problem was, okay, now I have the experience because Dueling Book came out. I know how to play the game. And now I also can travel to different places, but I still don't have the cards. And it's like, yes, you can be a talented player and you'll do well, but it really, Yu-Gi-Oh is just one of those games where unfortunately you really need the top cards. You really need the top
yeah,
cards.
and in
And I
the
didn't have
format.
BLS, just to put it like that, right? In Tengu format, I didn't even have a BLS. Like,
Yeah, that's you need BLS to play. Like I also argue you needed Maxi, you needed Tour Guys to play in 2011
yep,
as well.
I had none of those cards.
And we talked about this off camera, but now we're bringing it to the actual like we're bringing it to content now where people can hear us talk about this. But back in the day, yeah, these cards were extremely expensive and it was just hard to get them in general. Like not only money, but just finding people who were willing to part with them was all the thing. In this video that we're doing right here, this is inspired by a video that you recently did. How do how do you win or how do you top your tournament, right? How do you top your next Yu-Gi-Oh
Right.
tournament? You put out a video. I think that video was really, really cool. And it gave me the inspiration for this one because the number one question that I get, honestly, is how do I get better? And I typically answer that question the same way, no matter who's asking it. I say, you need to play more. Now,
Yeah.
that's true for, I would say 99% of people will just get better from playing more Yu-Gi-Oh. Everyone, I think, wants this really like crazy answer to that question, or they want some kind of bullet points to make them an insane player overnight. And I just don't think it works like that. Like, yes, you can be innately intelligent and you can do well because you're really good at thinking through plays and all that stuff like a chess game. But at the end of the day, what I boil Yu-Gi-Oh down to is it's a series of scenarios that you have to navigate correctly turn after turn. And the more scenarios you've experienced, the better you will be overall because you don't have to think on the fly.
Yes.
So if you play hundreds of games, eventually your brain is going to get to the point where it's like, oh, I remember what to do in this scenario. And I think this is so interesting because even me, somebody who is like a really good player, I have scenarios come up in tournaments that are really, really crazy or scary, or I'm just not experienced in them because I don't play as much as I should. And I might flub the situation because I've just never seen it before. For example, at Nationals, there was a play where I could have a Summon Swap Frog, brain controlled my opponent's Fosdina, bounce their Fosdina to their hand, and then play Miracle Fusion and attack for game. And I literally did not see that. And it's because it's not something that I do very often where I have to use my opponent's monster for Swap Frog effect to get it off the field to attack for game. And now that I have that play in my mind, I'll remember that for the rest of my time ever playing the game.
And then it's actually really interesting because now people are like, well, a True Hero or Cairo, like, why are you seeing success in Edison versus, the current, the previous formats rather? And it's because, well, when it comes to experience, I have the experience. When it comes to travel, I can travel. And cards, Edison format was cheap. Like now, these days, a lot of Edison cards, the price are rising. But I
Yeah.
got my deck before everything went up. So it's like now I can go and I can do well in these events. And even like Frazier was talking about how you have to play more to get better. Well, Frazier sat next to me a lot during nationals, like just coincidentally, right? It was purely coincidence. And I would finish my match very quickly. And yes, part of it is because Diva Hero is an OTK deck, but the other part of it is because I would see the same scenarios again and again and again. When I draw my 6, I know what to do.
Yeah, you are very fast. I will say, like, you are extremely fast at playing the game, way faster than I am. And I don't even go into time really, but you never get close to going to time. Like, it's crazy how much faster you are at playing than I am. Like, I watch you do your turns, and even when you have to think, it's not more than a few seconds. It's literally like maybe 10-15 seconds before you're like, all right, I'm gonna do this. But yeah, the amount of time that you take during your turn is really quick. It makes it where your opponents can't like slow play you. And we won't mention any names, but there was a tournament you played in recently where your opponent started reading their own extra deck in the middle of the game, and they had won a round before that in time. And so I was like, I wonder if this person's trying to slow play you. But then you would take your turn and it would be so quick that they just had to give up on it. Like, they pretty much had to give up on the idea of slow playing you, because you would just play so fast on your turn and pass back to them, and it will make it awkward in my opinion, as an outsider watching this match, it made it awkward if they took too long, because it's like, what could possibly be taking you this long? You don't have that many cards, you're reading your extra deck multiple times, you're looking at your graveyard, like, what are you actually doing here? Because the other guy is just going draw, attack, pass, like, or draw, set this, go, or do whatever, right? And it would be so quick, and then it passed back to them, and it puts the spotlight on that person to be like, what is taking you so long? And so they start to get nervous and flustered, and then there was like a huge misplay that came after that. But I think that the way you play, it kind of scares people. Like, I'm gonna be honest,
right?
I've seen your opponents be scared.
For all the listeners, Frazier either, we're not advocating playing fast. That is not
correct. Because I get on Stango about that shit all the time. I can't stand. I'd rather you play a little slower and make a good play than play fast and just completely throw the game. I hate that so much. I'm so hard on Stango about that because he's a melee player. He's one of the best melee players in the world. And because of that, his brain naturally is moving quick. He's always thinking extremely fast. So when he plays Yu-Gi-Oh, I have to tell him, like, slow down. You don't have to button mash. Like, you don't have to press buttons so quickly, essentially is what he's doing in Melee. And I'm like, when you play Yu-Gi-Oh, you can think. Like, we have time to actually think. You don't have to just make a decision.
Right. But the point of, this past few moments is just to explain that I've played so much. This is why I can play fast.
Yes.
But of course, if you're on the kind of method of how can I improve, if this is where you're at, then you need to be playing at a little bit of a slower pace, taking your time and thinking out your moves. And then the more scenarios that you encounter, then of course, over time, you'll improve, and over time, you'll become faster. But it starts with, just like Frazier said, playing the game more. Just play more, and then you're going to naturally see an improvement.
Yep, that's very true. And I akin a lot of this to Rock Lee versus Neji, which is why we have like clips of that playing, is because when I used to watch Naruto, one of the coolest things, one of my favorite characters was Neji. I naturally related a lot to Neji. He's just like a very cocky, like hardcore, super talented guy. He's born with like a natural talent, right? He's born into one of the most powerful clans in the village. And he's just overall cool. Like when you watch like regular Naruto, not Shippuden, because Shippuden, pretty much everyone became not a real person. But in the original Naruto series, Neji was the #1 Genin, and he was just really badass. And then Rock Lee, who was on his team, was kind of looked down upon by Neji. Like, Neji didn't really take him seriously because he couldn't use ninjutsu, because he wasn't on his level. He could only use taijutsu. But what you would see from Rock Lee is that every single day he would be doing so much work just to catch up. He'd be like doing 200 push-ups, 200 sit-ups, 200 chin-ups, and like doing all of these exercises because he could only use taijutsu. So he ended up honing that ability so much that when it got to the Chunin exam, if you remember, he takes off his weights. And everybody around who's watching was super surprised to see how far he had become, because everyone looked at him as like, you're not really a threat. You don't know anything but taijutsu. You can only do hand to hand. You're not really that good. But he worked so hard. And that's kind of the point, is that he put in the work. And I don't care how talented someone is. You could be the best fucking most talented, most smart player in the world. You could be the smartest thing in the world. If somebody works harder than you, they will eventually catch up to you and surpass you. That is just real. That's the reality of it. Hard work beats talent. You've all heard it before, and that's just a very, very real thing. Like, hard work really does beat talent. And Rock Lee, I would argue that there was a point in that series where he was super either caught up to Neji or like straight up past him. Like Neji,
Yeah.
interestingly enough, didn't really acknowledge when Rock Lee took off the weights like everyone else did. They actually show him with his arms crossed, almost as if he's unbothered. But I don't know if I really believe narratively that Neji in his head wasn't thinking like, holy fuck, this guy who I looked down on, this person who I once thought was just not my rival or not my peer, is now at a level where I have to respect them, because Neji really didn't respect Rock Lee at all. And Rock Lee worked behind the scenes super hard to get to where he is. And I was like, yeah, he commands respect. And everyone in a shooting exam, every person watching had to respect Rock Lee. So
Right. Be careful who you make fun of in high school.
Be careful who you make fun of in high school. So another thing that I wanted to cover in this, because we do have some bullet points here that I wanted to talk about. I think that you play a lot, and you and Stengo, I often watch you guys play, and everyone knows I have been mentoring Stengo throughout the last couple years in Yu-Gi-Oh in general. And then what happens is Stengo and Cairo play all the time. Like I'll be on Discord, and those two, because we have a group chat, and in that group chat, those two, I'll just see an ongoing call. So I'll just jump in a call and be like, oh, what's happening? I'm like, yo, share your screen. I want to see what's happening. So Stengo will share his screen, and I'll start watching him play Cairo. And a lot of times, at least back in the day, I would just basically coach Stengo into winning, and Cairo would get so annoyed because he's like, well, it's really fucking hard to beat him when he has a YCS champion literally telling him what to do. Like he would always be
Those
like,
were my words exact.
Those were my words exact. He would be so mad. He'd be like, yeah, it's hard to, and then I would also do this annoying thing where I would say exactly what's in Cairo's hand, and then Cairo would be like, yo, Frazier, stay out of my hand, because I just have, and this is from experience, I just have an innate ability to know exactly what my opponent.
He's not looking at my hand, actually. He's just making a read based off the game state.
Yes, I'll look at the game and be like, well, he clearly has this. And then Cairo will be like, I'm so annoyed. Like, just please stay out of my hand, because I can't actually see it, but I know what he has based on the way the game is going. And I've done this hundreds of times, to the point where even when like Kenny will play, Kenny, who I do the podcast with, he'd be like, yo, that shit is scary. Like they were playing goats one time, and Kenny had set like 3 back rows, and I was like, one of those is a nobleman to cross out. And then like after the game ended, when he flipped up his back row, he was like, I hate you, by the way. Like, why did you just know that one of my back rows was a nobleman to cross out? I was like, because I don't believe that they're all real, first of all. I was like, I looked at the situation, I was like, you were hiding a real back row because you were scared of it getting hit by a random MST or Dust Ender or Breaker. And so you set a nobleman. I was like, it's very, to me, like I've played so much Yu-Gi-Oh! And I just kind of understand the Yu-Gi-Oh! Mindset, that I knew exactly what you have. So I do the same thing when you and Stengo play. I used to coach him all the time, and it's obviously annoying from your perspective because you're like, I just want to play. I don't want to like lose. You're basically playing me at that point, right? Like you're basically playing me with Stengo just being my puppet. And so that would drive you crazy. And you're like, yo, can you just like after the game, say
it's
what
funny
you did
because
wrong?
It's happened so many times, not even with Stengo. Even one time we were playing like, I think IRL with Luke. No, it wasn't IRL. We were playing online through Dueling Book with Luke. And then Luke was considering to like summon a monster.
Oh,
and I had like,
yes.
And then you were like, hey, that back row hasn't been activated in a while. And then Luke's like, oh yeah, you're right. But Luke's plan, whether he admits to it or not, was planning to summon a monster because he was going to go for game. And then he just never summoned after he, heard your input. And
it was torrential.
Never got activated. Yeah, and it was torrential. Yeah,
I've read a torrential in that game just because of the way the game was going. And Luke did have the notion that he wanted to go for game. And I was like, I don't think you should do that. Like, I really think that if you just keep attacking, you'll just win the game this way. And it ended up being 100%. And then Cairo, I remember you were pretty upset about that one because I was like, nah, I think Luke would have saw it, but we'll never know. Like, that's why you preface it that way. We'll never know what really would have happened there. But I do agree that he was more likely to summon because that's kind of where his mindset was going. And you would have won. Like, if that torrential went off, you would have for sure had won that game. But the whole point of this is to just really say, like, I'm a person who likes to teach people at this point. I don't really play as much. I don't play test anymore. You can attest this. You can literally vouch for me. I do not test. I do not test.
When we were at Nationals the night before, Frazier wasn't like worried about what deck he's going to play.
Nope.
He wasn't up trying to play like a bunch of Yu-Gi-Oh! And even the night before National, and Frazier's mentioned this on a few of his recent videos, he was playing Dragon Turbo at the locals.
Yeah.
So the first time he played with his deck that he came in top 4 with for Nationals was at Nationals.
Yes. Like, I literally did not play a single game between Deck Devastators 4 and Nationals round 1. I did not play a single game with my frog deck between those. So there was Deck Devastators 4, where I topped with the frog deck. Then there was RBET, where I played Christia Sworn. And then there was Nationals. And I didn't use the deck that I actually used at Nationals to get top 4, between any of those weeks. Like I literally did not touch it. I did not play any fun games. I didn't record any YouTube content. Like if you noticed, there hasn't been a YouTube video between those times of me playing like frogs or anything like that because it just didn't happen. Like I just really didn't play test. And that's for a couple reasons. I think that one is because Edison is a locked format. So I feel like I've gotten a lot of experience already in the format. Not to say that I can't still improve, but I've played so much Edison already that I feel like I don't need to really play as much in order to do well. Like I feel like I'm just still better than 99% of the players who play the game. So like when I play, I feel like my natural ability to play the game at a high level will just carry me quite far. And that has been true honestly all year because again, I do not test. Like whenever I'm thinking about stuff, I just do theoretical Yu-Gi-Oh. Like I always think like in theory, this makes sense. Like it was a complete theory to me. Some of the cards that are in my side deck and stuff like that. Me deciding to main deck Trap Dust Shoot for Nationals and take out the Scapegoat. I didn't test it. I didn't get to play it a single game to know if it was good or bad. I said in theory, this just makes sense to me, right? Like certain things just make sense to me in theory. But I put the hard work in a long time ago. That way I don't have to do it as much. Whereas with you, when we got back to my apartment from Nationals, because Cairo has been staying here while he's in America for a while, I come downstairs in the morning. So like we stayed up the night before playing Smash Bros. And he was playing like our friend Gary and Yu-Gi-Oh and stuff like that, or playing Stengo on Discord. They were playing Yu-Gi-Oh. And then I come downstairs in the morning to see like, what we're going to do for the day. And I'm like, what are you doing? And I just hear Stengo's voice coming through his laptop. And I'm like, oh, you guys are dueling. And I just start watching them duel. But literally in the morning, one of the first things that he's doing is either playing DB Randos or playing Stengo. And those two are having a time of their life. And I'm like, I don't know how you guys don't get a little burnt out from just playing so much Yu-Gi-Oh. But
and also, even when I'm not playing, right? Because the thing is, not only do I play enough, but also like how Frazier does conceptual thinking, I also do conceptual thinking of my own, and I watch a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh content.
You do.
I don't think so highly of myself that, oh, I'm the best, I know everything. No. First of all, I always watch Frazier's videos, all of them. And second of all, I watch the other YouTubers as well. I'm not going to mention them because you know who they are, right?
Yeah.
But I watch all of their videos. And I think, all the YouTubers kind of watch each other. I think all of us just, whether we admit to it or not, I think we all watch each other, right? But I watch all the Yu-Gi YouTubers because I want to know their perception on the game. I want to know how they think. I want to know what they think is good. And then, of course, after listening to it, I can align it to what I think as well, because that's part of the game is one, actually playing, and two, listening. And another reason how I got so good too is because, like Frazier said, we've been friends for more than 10 years and we went to the same local for a long time. And back when I wasn't as good, every time Frazier would speak, I would listen, right? And not just Frazier, but everyone, right? You can learn so much by listening. But the thing is, first, you need to humble yourself, right?
That's very
You need
true.
to acknowledge that you're not as good as you think you are, because many Yu-Gi-Oh players, they think they're so good and they're not. Right? Not to insult anyone, but it's just the reality.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with not being great yet. Like if you're still learning and like figuring things out, there's nothing wrong with that. It takes a while to get your footing in this game, and honestly, in anything in life that you want to do really well, they say it takes 10,000 hours to master something.
Yes.
So you have to be willing to put that work in. So I agree with you 100% that not everybody is that good, but you have to check your ego at the door, right? If you have not been performing well, then you have to think like, what is wrong? Why am I not performing well? It's not just, oh, I got unlucky, because that can only explain so many losses. At some point, you have to be like, all right, what am I actually doing wrong here? Maybe this isn't the deck for me. Maybe I'm not playing as well as I think I'm playing, and that's what has to happen. Like I've been there before, where I literally thought to myself, what's wrong? Like why am I not able to do well at these events, or what's going on? Like it can't just be unlucky every time. Like sure, there are definitely some games that come down to luck. No question, we're playing a card game. There's a variance, but at the end of the day, if you're actually as good as you think you are, you should be able to perform well at some point, right? Like that's just the reality of it. So
yes, and that was actually one of the points that I made in my How to Win video. Like, yes, sometimes you truly do get sacked, but more people think that they got sacked when in reality, if you go back and you watch your replay, oh, I could have made this play instead of that. Oh, I didn't have to summon here. Oh, I didn't have to walk into this Mirror Force or this Torrential or etc.
Yep.
Like there's so many plays because Yu-Gi-Oh is like a domino effect. Every small decision that you make affects the entire outcome of the game. Every small one. And even my losses, I actually go back and I talk to a lot of my losses about with Frazier. And then Frazier will even say, well, you could have did this instead of that. And I have to just agree, right? Like you always have to check your ego and be like, okay, yeah, that's right. I didn't have to wait to activate deck Debbie. Or, oh, yeah, you're right. I didn't have to do this instead of that. There's so many just minute decisions that you might think might not make a big difference. But in reality, every small decision matters.
Yeah, it's actually crazy because lately I've been having a harder time critiquing your decision making because you've gotten so goddamn good that when I watch, it's only very small things. Like literally, this is an example, and you basically just brought it up with the deck devy one. So at nationals, you had a chance to deck devy your opponent. You had Cataster and deck devy set, and your opponent had a set monster. And I was like, oh, why didn't you deck devy him as soon as he drew for turn just to destroy the set? Because we know the set monster is going to get destroyed, no question. But then I was like, it also will hit if it's Ryko face down, then obviously we'll kill that Ryko and then whatever else is in his hand. If it's Hamster face down, it means that he won't get to flip it and then set a Ryko from his deck. And to me, that matters because the argument was, and it wasn't really an argument, but the argument was basically if he flips the Hamster, he gets to set Ryko. And then you could deck devy him after. But the problem with that is he's thinned his deck of a Ryko, and that's just one less card in his deck to actually be affected by deck devastation virus. So I was like, you could argue that it is a bit of a misplay to let your opponent flip what could be a Hamster to then set a Ryko, because at the end of the day, when you're playing deck devy, you want a couple things to happen. You want it to actually devastate your opponent, and that means hitting everything that they have in their hand and in their field as much as possible. But then you also want it to carry on for the next 2 turns after that, because that's what it does. You want it to hit cards out of their hand when they draw for turn, and the best way to do that is to leave them with the most cards with as many cards as possible that are left in their deck. So like again, when the frog deck does the substitute combo and I thin my deck out, I don't have that many cards left for you to deck devy me. So it's in your best interest to try to resolve deck devastation virus before substitute does its thing, because I can still draw swap frogs and dupe frogs and unifrog and treeborn, all that. Like I can draw all of these cards that will get destroyed, which is essentially skipping the person's draw phase. So it was very small though, and that's what I mean. Like that was such a small thing because we're talking about a Ryko in the deck thinning it out if it gets flipped in Hamster, So it was like the smallest little thing, but I was like, yeah, that could potentially change the game and like all this other stuff. And we just have these conversations often. And lately I've been noticing that, especially because when it comes to Diva Hero, I consider you to be the expert, no question. Like it's not even close. I think you're by far the best Diva Hero player. So to me, like when I'm critiquing you, I'm always careful to be like, okay, I'm not saying this as like you play like shit here or you did something completely wrong, but just consider this alternative to the play. Because I know you had a good reason for why you did anything that you did. Like I know that you're not just doing plays, and no offense to like Stango, but sometimes we catch him where he's just doing plays. It's like you didn't really think about that. You were just doing shit. And I know if you flipped it after he like flipped his set monster and it ended up being Hamster, you thought about the possibility of it being Hamster. But you were like, you know what? If it's Hamster, I'll do this. If it's Ryko, I'll do this. Like you've thought about it already, even in those fast ass turns that you take, you still thought about it. So I don't really have to question like, were you thinking there? Because I don't really see you do like crazy throws. And that's just because, again, going back to the original point, you've played so much. You've experienced so many scenarios that you know exactly what you want to do in any given scenario. Not to say that you can't still learn, not to say that I can't still learn, because I learn from you guys. I learn from you and Stango. Like when I watch you guys play, I basically that's my play testing in a way. Like I always say in Naruto, there's a part where he learns to train with his clones. What he does is he multiplies himself with a bunch of shadow clones, and then they all start training, and then he cancels them and he gains all the information that they got while they were training. So when I used to judge Yu-Gi-Oh, I would watch like 10 tables at a time. So I would go to the top tables because I always would tell whoever the head judge was, I would like to be seated, or I would like to be standing near the top tables while I'm judging. Because for me, it's not only valuable to me as a player and as a person, because I'm still a competitive person at the end of the day when I was judging, but I also think that I have a good handle on the rulings at a high level. So like when the top players at these regionals, when they need a good ruling call, like they pretty much never have to appeal me. And so I would watch the top tables, and I would watch like literally 5 different tables, which is 10 players playing. I would watch 5 different tables, and I would see how each of them did their opening plays. And I would think to myself, looking at their hand, what I would have done differently. And I would be tracking how the game progressed based on what they did as opposed to what I would have done. And if they did something that I thought was interesting and that I didn't see before, I'd be like, huh, that's very interesting. I didn't think about that. And now I've saved that play in my head, or I've saved that mindset in my head. And that overall has, I think, made me a better player because I've just seen so many scenarios.
Yeah. And it just goes down to like what I mentioned earlier. There's so many ways to learn, but if you want to improve, you need to utilize as many of those different methods as possible. And, Frazier has been talking a lot about hard work versus talent, right? Basically Rock Lee versus Neji. But that's not the only kind of like anime, shonen anime, where we can see this depiction of hard work versus talent. Even if anyone from the 90s, right, Dragon Ball Z.
Yes.
Look at Goku and Vegeta, right? Vegeta, clearly talented. He was born into a royal elite family, right? He had everything. And yes, I'm not just saying that Vegeta didn't work hard, because everyone knows that Vegeta worked hard. But when you look at Goku, his power level, I think, was like 1, right? When he was a baby.
Yeah,
like,
he was such a weakling compared to like Brawly and Vegeta and everybody else.
Exactly. Like nobody thought anything, not even his own father, right? Until, he saw the vision of him beating Frieza.
Yeah.
But the point is that nobody thought anything of Goku. But what did Goku do? He trained. He showed that not only, because now everyone knows that Goku, of course, has talent, but he got that way because he worked hard.
Right.
And in the early episodes of Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, what is Goku doing? He's training. He's doing push-ups. He's doing handstand push-ups. He's doing sit-ups. He's always training. Even when he was on his way to Namek in the spaceship.
Oh, I love that arc.
Yes, he was training. All Goku did was train.
Yeah, when he turned the gravity up, I'll never forget that, watching Toonami as a kid and seeing Goku turning the gravity up inside of the that capsule core ball thing.
Yes.
And like literally just shooting Kamehamehas, and they would like bend around in a circle and almost hit him in the back, and he would like dodge his own Kamehameha that way. Like just the crazy things that he was doing in that intense 100 times gravity thing, so absurd. Like he was such an absurd person that worked extremely hard, and you see him sweating his ass off and then going into the little water chamber thing to recover. But yeah, I always respected that aspect of Goku, because when I growing up, I didn't really care for him. But then as I got older, I was like, damn, he works really hard. Like Goku works so hard. Like say what you want about his personality, he works really, really, really hard. And that, again, hard work beats talent. Like at the end of the day, if you just work really, really hard at something, you can be better than the best of them. That is just how it works. I've seen it happen way too many times in Yu-Gi-Oh! And it just happens in life in general. If you work really hard and you put your mind to you put your mindset like, I can do this, I can be better, don't give up on yourself, you will eventually get there. That's my belief. I believe that if you really do believe that you can do it, you can get there.
Yes, that's right. It all comes down to you. But you have to be willing to put in the work. And like you mentioned as well, a lot of people expect things to happen overnight. In reality, it's not going to happen like that. Even for me, right? It didn't happen overnight. For anyone who's truly gotten to where they are, right? Unless you've come from a royal family, or you've received a large inheritance, generally they work really hard for it.
Yeah.
And that's what you got to do. You have to be willing to put in the time in Yu-Gi-Oh! You can't just want it, but you have to work for it. And if you work for it and you have the right mindset, because a lot of people, they're like, oh, I've been playing Yu-Gi-Oh! For so long. But I mentioned this in my video, right? There's a difference between playing to play and playing to learn. Those are two different things.
Yeah,
because
that's true.
If you're just playing the game, you're like, oh, I played a lot. Well, are you really going back and analyzing your mistakes? Are you really checking to see about the plays that you could have done differently? Because if not, then you're just playing to play. You have to play to learn. And then you'll start to see results over time.
Yeah, I'm quick, and I think you are too, to click the view replay button when I lose. I like to know exactly what went wrong. If my opponent drew something, I like to know it. If I could have done something differently, if there was a crucial point where if I did this, then the outcome would have changed. I like to view replay all the time. Like I don't just rage quit, close my browser, and then step away from my computer and be like, fuck this game, it's all luck based. Like I don't do that. I'm too old for that, first of all. And second of all, like again, check your ego. At the end of the day, we all have like a bit of an ego. It is what it is. But you have to be realistic with yourself. Why did you lose the game? Go back and watch that replay and see if there was a point where you could have done something differently that would have changed the outcome. And also try not to get too much into hindsight, because something that does happen is, and I've been preaching this a lot to our inner circle, but I'm saying it here now, is sometimes people will watch replays and they'll be like, if I did this, I could have won. But the play that they're saying that they would have had to do would have been so ridiculous without like the hindsight of knowing exactly what your opponent had 99%. Like you knew all of your opponent's cards. In the replay, you could see everything. So it's like, yeah, you could have made that play, but that play was also insanely like hard to make with out the information that the replay gives you where it's everything is revealed, right? You know what I mean? Like some plays are just hard to make. And if it's I call them like hindsight replays, don't think that, oh, if I would have done this, I would have won. Like, sure, you could have won if you did this crazy play.
If you would have black rose your own field to avoid the brain control.
Right. It's like, that's such an absurd thing to do. Like, why would you get rid of all of your cards to avoid that in that scenario? Like it would have won you the game, but realistically in that situation, would that have been the right play based on what you knew? Not really. Like, not really. If you play the odds, your opponent, they had to get lucky to have the brain control. So you still did the right thing. It's just that sometimes you lose doing the right thing. That's just Yu-Gi-Oh! That's just cards. That's every card game ever. Sometimes you do the right thing. It happens in poker. It'll tell you the odds. When you're watching the World Series of Poker, they'll say this person has a 13% chance of winning, and the other person has an 87% chance of winning. And what'll happen? The fucking person with the 13% chance will just win. And it's like, yeah, even though the other person played it correctly, they did everything they were supposed to do, they got it to a point where they are 87% favored. They ended up losing because there is still a degree of luck involved. That's just, it is what it is. But yeah, to the point, watch your own replays. Make sure that you're seeing what you could do differently. And like Cairo said, play to learn, not necessarily just play to play. Like, I'm not advocating for just playing 100 games of Yu-Gi-Oh! And being frustrated with the result or whatever, or being happy with the result if you win a bunch of it. Actually consider what's happening in these games and like how you can improve your gameplay. Try things out too. And I see people test play with their friends and they're just trying to win. And like, I get it. We do want to win, but if you're truly testing, allow takebacks in testing.
I was just about to get to that point. When I play Stango, we do takebacks all the time, right? Because it's like we both want to improve. So it's just like I'll make a play and I'll be like, oh no, Stango. And like if you're just watching, you're gonna be really confused because a lot of times me and Stango are just having a voice chat, like we're on Discord talking to each other, right? So it's like I'll take back a play and I'm like, oh, on second thought, like I don't do it this way, I'll do it this way. Now, of course, there is a limit to take backs. Like you can't take back on your opponent's turn. Like, oh wow. Right. But if you're still in the middle of like your same phase and then you realize like, oh, it's a mistake, then yeah, like allow your friend or your opponent like to take it back if you're play testing so that you can improve. Right. And that's what me and Stango do. We allow takebacks because we just want to get better. It's not like an ego thing. Like Stango doesn't care if he wins. Like I don't care if I win. Like we just want to get better.
Yeah. At the end of the day, you should be playing to actually improve and not necessarily to beat your friend in playtesting. If you're truly saying we are going to test, then the proper way to test is to allow takebacks so that way, if something is egregiously wrong or like you realize like, oh yeah, I probably shouldn't do this. Like it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to do this play. Then just take that shit back and then play the game out from the perspective that you did it right the first time and then go from there. That's kind of the point. When me and Silverman or McCabe used to test back in the day, it would get to a point where we would play with our hands kind of face up just because we're trying to improve. I'm not trying to beat Silverman. I'm not trying to beat McCabe. Like that's not my goal is not to necessarily just beat them unless we play like, the finals of a YCS, which how often would that happen? But like realistically, it's to beat everyone else, like to get to the point where we're so good that we'll just beat other players and not necessarily your friend. So try not to have the big fish, small pond mindset where you're like, I just want to beat you to prove that I'm better than you. It's like, no, if you're testing, actually test. Okay, real quick, before we wrap this up, it's a couple other things I want to say about playing a lot. I have a bullet point here that says playing a shit ton leads to higher stamina. I think that's just like something I wanted to get out there. When you play a lot, your overall stamina in Yu-Gi-Oh! Will increase because you'll just be used, your body, your mind will be used to playing so many scenarios. And what happens is when you play a lot of scenarios, you don't have to think on the fly. One of the things that does actually hinder me is that because I don't play enough, when I get into certain weird scenarios, like that one I mentioned earlier, I have to think what to do on the fly, which requires brain power. Like I have to now figure out, I've never been in this situation before. What am I supposed to do here? Whereas if I played that scenario or I've come across it in the past, I would get to that scenario and it would be 2 seconds. Summon, swap, frog, brain control, false nine, bounce to your hand, activate miracle fusion, attack for game. It wouldn't even be a thought, right? Like it would just be like, oh, this is just what you do here. This is just the play. It's not even a big deal. This is just what you do. But when you don't have that experience, when you don't have when you don't have that experience, you're just like, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do here. Then you start thinking about it and then you come up with something else that's not necessarily the best play or the right play. So yeah, and playing a lot increases your stamina.
And then it's funny that you mentioned stamina because Nationals Day 2, Frazier and I were both X and 1, right? And we're going into the second day. So we have to do round 8, 9. And if we do well, then we also have to do top 8, right? And that day, like physical stamina, we didn't eat.
Yeah, we didn't eat, and I didn't drink anything. Did you drink anything? I didn't drink any water either.
Nothing. Just went in just raw.
Yeah, that was bad. That was a bad idea because I definitely needed water, even if I don't necessarily need food like that. Because I can go pretty much every event I've ever topped. I don't really eat. At least during the event, like after the event, yes, I go crazy. I get dessert, I get like dinner and everything with all my friends. I'm really big on that type of stuff. But during the event, for some reason, like eating just ruins me. I guess because your body takes some of your energy to break down the food that you ate. So I don't
Right.
like playing when I'm feeling a little sluggish from eating food. But what I do is that I need water. And I just
Drink
didn't
your
I
water.
didn't have water, and that is a big deal because your brain just does not function well without water. So yeah, that physical stamina is also a big deal.
Yes. Please drink your water. Please.
And then one of the other things is so find a deck and stick to it for a long period of time and actually try
Right.
to master it. And I used a True Hero, Silchus Ruin, and Rawnek as examples of people who basically are known for playing the same deck for an extended period of time. And they tend to do really well with it. Like last year in 2022, I remember Silchus had topped pretty much every tournament in the beginning of the year for a while. Like he was doing really well with Diva Hero, and he was basically carrying the mantle for Diva Hero. He was like the solo person who was doing well at basically everything. He was basically a true hero last year. And I would argue that a part of that is because he knew that deck really, really well, and he stuck with it. And he made changes from list to list. Like every tournament would be slightly different. But the point is that he stuck with it. And I think that that's a big deal too. It's like find a deck that you actually enjoy playing. Because at the end of the day, you could be like, oh, Black Wings is the best deck, I'll just play Black Wings. But if you don't enjoy playing Black Wings, I promise you, it's going to be hard to do well with that deck because you don't actually like it. The reason
There are
why,
so many people, right, who are kind of like deck affiliated. When you look at beast mode, like you were mentioning earlier,
yep,
zombies, but he also can do it with more than just zombies. But this is just to give an example, right? When
yes,
you look at 10-foot,
Vomit
Vite,
Turbo.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
everybody
So
is synonymous with a deck usually. Like obviously you're synonymous with Diva Hero. Not to say that you can't play other decks. You taught with Black Wings recently, but it's like at the end of the day, the reason why you switched to Black Wings was because you already had like 5 tops with Diva Hero. So you're like, yeah, I know how to play Diva Hero very well. I've done this before. Let me see if something else works for me. And I don't want to say like, find a deck and then stick to it even if you don't really care for it. Again, the point is that I want you to like the deck that you play in Edison format. There are a lot of competitive decks. You don't have to just stick to a bad one or whatever. You can just play like I don't think that necessarily Frogs is the best deck in the format, but I do think that it's one of the best decks in the format. I think that it's S tier for sure. And
yes,
whether it has good matchups, bad matchups, I just stick with it. I try to improve on those matchups. We know that Diva Hero, it has its problems as well. Cairo talks about it all the time. The deck loses to things like Oppression, Vanity's Fiend, False Nine, and stuff like that. And then it loses to itself. But instead of giving up on the deck because of those reasons, he just stuck with it and changed it small changes over time to kind of
right.
refine it. But you don't give up on your deck because it crapped out on you at a couple tournaments. You have to be willing to stick with it.
Now, one of the points that I mentioned in my how to win video is you need to make sure the deck that you pick is a meta deck.
Yes.
Don't be trying to do this with like Crystal Beasts, right? Like,
Right. Yeah, that's just not real. And that's the thing. Like I'm at the end of the day, I'm playing frogs, right? Like I'm not I didn't go to Glad like I'm playing fucking frogs. So I'm still playing one of the best decks in the format. But I'm
right.
not gonna try to force that to happen with Glad Beast. That's just not real.
So my suggestion was as long as your deck is A tier or higher, then you can do it.
Yeah.
And there are so many A and S tier decks with an Edison format. You have your pick of the litter.
You really do. And the last thing I want to say, this is the actual last point I want to make. I get this question a lot about, hey, how do you play this deck? Do you play it conservative or do you play it aggro? And I've learned this from Patrick Hoban, so I'm gonna give him the credit for this. But he was one of the people who told me that play styles don't really exist. That's not really a thing. Playing conservative or playing aggro, like that's not a thing. What is a thing is the correct play. Every single turn, there is a correct play to make, and everything else is just suboptimal or straight up wrong. And you can think about this and hopefully you arrive to the same conclusion, but I realized that he was right. Like back in the day, I used to think, oh, the best players play conservative. They hold their cards and that's how they win. They like don't play their cards. And by holding their cards, they just end up winning more games because their opponents aren't ready for certain things because they make bad reads. Like, oh, you might think that I don't have torrential because I held it so long. But at the end of the day, if your opponent did something that makes you need the torrential, you should just torrential. It's not about being conservative because a conservative would say, don't do it until you get this amount of value from it. But like, no, there are times when torrentialing one monster is correct. It is just the correct play. It doesn't need to be like, oh, I got a +1 off my torrential or my mirror force hit 2 cards or 3 cards or whatever. It's like, no, sometimes it's correct to mirror force the 1 card. That way you are in a better position throughout the game to win the game. This brings you closer to winning the game. 1 card or not, mirror forcing sometimes is just correct to do it on 1 monster. And so like, that question that I get, conservative versus aggro, they don't really exist. That's not really a thing. At the end of the day, there is one correct play every turn. And that's what you should be striving for, is just making the correct play, not necessarily the aggro play, not necessarily the conservative play, whatever is correct. Sometimes it's correct to be aggressive. Sometimes it's correct to be conservative, but that's not just like a play style that you're like, oh, I just play aggro. Like I just start summoning my shit and attacking, and that's just how to play the game. Like, no, sometimes it's like, yes, you want to actually think, in this scenario that my opponent's in, I can be super aggro here because the game state is calling for me to be aggro. And I know that if I drop him this low, now brain control will actually win the game. Yeah, this might look weird that I'm summoning a blizzard and not using the effect and attacking him, but like,
literally just about to say that, because one of the best decks to kind of prove that point that you and Patrick Hoban have just said is Black Wings. Because Black Wings, everyone knows Black Wings is an oppressive aggro deck.
Yep.
But there are also times where you play Black Wings and you need to play control or more conservatively. And there's no right or wrong way to play Black Wings. The point is there's a correct play and then there's an incorrect play.
Yep.
And Black Wings, you need to make your correct decision based on the game state.
Yep. So I just want to get that out there as well. And that's pretty much all I have on this. I hope you guys really did enjoy this video, Cairo. For people who don't know, his name is A True Hero on YouTube and pretty much on everything on Discord and Dueling Book. So definitely follow A True Hero on YouTube if you're still not doing that. I don't know what you're doing. Right now, we just crossed 1,500 subscribers on the IMNerdpodcast YouTube channel. So if you haven't subscribed and you're listening to this, please go to A True Hero's channel and subscribe to his channel. Do you want to say anything else?
No, I mean, I just hope that this video can provide insight for a lot of players. And, you know, definitely here at I Am Nerd Podcast and A True Hero, right? We want everybody to improve and we want everyone, we want to play you in the finals. That's what we want to do.
That'd be great.
You know?
That'd be great. All right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoy it. We'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.
Peace.